Hi, my name is Vivian Acquah, and this is Let's Humanize the Workplace. I know a lot of people are watching this episode or are really anticipating this episode because they seem to think that it will be a battle, but it won't be. It will be a juicy battle, though. It will be a juicy battle. So again, this episode, this platform is meant to inspire employees and employers to do better. The main reason why I'm going to do that, I'm going to highlight the person that is the cause of everything. But first, I need to show something on my screen. So if you want to stay tuned, or if you want to be updated with the new and the juicy episodes, go to bit.ly HTW news, and you will be on the news. You will be on the news list and you will receive it. Also, know that this episode will be shared on the podcast. So, in a few days, you can definitely listen to it when you are in the bus, maybe, or when you are driving in the car, or just doing your work during work hours. Listen to it because this is a must-have. This is an epic episode that you must listen to, re-listen to, watch to, re-watch to, because it's a must-have. So, going to the next slide. I have to bring some attention to what I've seen recently, and that has to do with the reason. Let's say that this lady was making racial comments within Adidas. Also know that Adidas made a statement with Blackout Tuesday. Also know that Adidas is working with Queen Bee. Queen Bee saying Beyonce. And what would Beyonce think if she knew that there was somebody within the organization who was making these comments, who was making racial comments, who was sharing comments where she made it was a person, the head of HR, head of human resources, made a statement, or made a few comments about why this whole movement is necessary. And a lot of people within Adidas brought this into the light. And when you don't address, or when you don't provide adequate training, not only training for the employees itself, but also training to the top, to the leaders, to the managers, and do this frequently, this would not have happened. So I'm just saying that you need to train everybody within the organization, and not only commit with a one-time training. You need to build that muscle. You need to build the diversity, equity, inclusion muscle, so that everybody knows how to speak up when it comes to discrimination, speak up when it comes to racial injustice, or speak up when it comes to social injustice, or whatever injustice that occurs in the workplace. So I just wanted to highlight this, and also going to give a shout out to Queen Bee. For everybody who's part of the Queen Bee tribe, just tag her, just let her know that the brand that she's working with should be doing better. So that's it. And I also want to highlight, because I mentioned, a special person who started this whole movement, and this is my son. At the time, he was 3, Orlando, and he is my life coach. He doesn't know that, he doesn't realize that, but he's the main reason why I'm advocating for thriving workplaces, why I am advocating for diversity, for inclusion, for so many justice that we need. We want the employee experience to be the best for everybody, not for some people, not for just 90% of the people, not just for 50% of the people, all the people. As he's biracial, it is important for me as a Black mom to let him know, tell him about the social injustice that's happening, of course, on his level. But I wish that I did not have to do that, but I have to. And I also have to do my best to create that world, create that workplace, create that environment where I know that he will deal with less BS than his mother dealt with. So he's my ride or die. He's my all. And of course, I love my partner as well. But Orlando is the reason why I am advocating for this. So I'm doing my best. But I also have to highlight Michael Groenewoud. This one is especially for you. I hope that you're ready with your popcorn. I'm hoping that you're ready for the battle. and I'm going to bring the guests up. So first of all, Fabella and Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey. Together, we are all going to amplify DEI, the US version versus Europe. So I'm going to bring them up right now. Let me see. And I'm going to highlight them as well. So first up is Fabella. She is a DEI and remote team specialist who helps companies translate their diversity and inclusion initiatives intersectionally across distributed teams. She's also the host of the Inclusion in Progress podcast. So if you don't know that podcast, look up in Google or iTunes, go to that podcast and subscribe. The second one is Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey, and he is a recognized authority on diversity and inclusion in the workplace. He leads a consultancy designing inclusive companies for the 21st century. Jonathan is also a host of the Element of Inclusion podcast, a second podcast that you have to subscribe, and of course my podcast as well, but those two definitely subscribe. Welcome, everybody.
We're so happy to be here.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Great
You're
to be
welcome.
here.
You're welcome. I'm already seeing some comments in. So Marjolein is saying, yes, let's build that DEI muscle. Hasiba is saying, hi, agree. Okay, Michael is definitely watching with his popcorn. So you're welcome, Michael. I hope you have enough popcorn ready to join this battle. And let's start with the first thing. What is your connection with humanizing the workplace? And I will start with Jonathan.
Well, first thing I'm wondering, is this really a battle? That's the first thing.
No, people want to hype it up. People want
to hype it.
I'm just giving them the news that they want to hear. That's all.
I know, right? I know. We should all be working together. But humanizing the workforce. So with us, we believe that people are the most important part of any organization, and everyone should have their opportunity, should have the opportunity to reach their potential within the workplace. So if we're talking about humanizing the workforce, we believe that people are the most important part. They're human, and anything we can do to promote that, to make sure that everyone, the way we describe inclusion, everyone performs, everyone belongs. The more we get of that, the more human the workplace is.
I love it. Kay.
She's been waiting for that.
Well, thank you so much for having both of us here. I think this is, been watching your shows for a while on LinkedIn, so it's really kind of surreal to be here. And yeah, for me, humanizing the workplace, it's, to piggyback off of what Jonathan said, we want to create spaces where we can be our whole selves. And not just our whole selves, but our best selves. And that won't always necessarily be smooth or easy, but at least to be in a space where we know that we're valued and seen and heard for who we are, and that we can engage in conversations in a meaningful way that help move us to compromise, that help move us towards solutions, that help move us towards just an environment where people can really perform at their best.
I have to say, so I invited Kay a while ago. She was on my radar for a very long time, and I am so happy that she's on here. I also know Jonathan from a long time, a while ago last year, and I challenged Kay to bring on somebody, to bring on a lift as you climb guest, because this platform is not only for me. Like I said, I'm doing this for my son. I'm doing this for so many other people. And why not bring on somebody that you want to shine the light on them as well, but also include them in this conversation? And she brought Jonathan on. So can you share why?
Because he's the best, obviously. I'm
being flattered the whole time here. This is great.
Yeah, this is it's amazing, right?
You know?
I was going to say
that, to me, oh, do you want to come on? I was like, yeah, thanks. Yeah. So I'm grateful just to be here, but boy, carry on.
Yeah, no, the only battle that we're going to be having is against inequity. That's the only battle. Like here, we're just, this is our kumbaya circle right here. But honestly, no, I brought Jonathan on because, so I'm obviously not European. I'm very proudly waved that flag, literally, in some cases on LinkedIn. And as somebody who is of, American passport holder, has called Spain and Europe home for the last 10 years, I have always been looking to not just translate DEI initiatives to the European continent, but also more specifically, find folks who have the lived experiences, have the expertise, have the knowledge of the cultural context of which we live in. And that was the main reason why, when I was first looking for just knowledge resources to make me a better practitioner, I stumbled upon Jonathan's podcast, Element of Inclusion. It is incredible. It's how I stalked him and found him on LinkedIn, and how we've since become friends. And as soon as Vivian said, "Who do you want to call up with you?" I'm like, more people need to, I know you're a pretty big deal already, Jonathan, but more people need to know you, especially from the US side, because I think that, and I know we're going to talk about the DEI space in the US versus Europe today.
You're already giving all the goodies away.
Sorry, in a loving battle way. But I think the best way for us to know how to create strategies that actually are tailored to each context, or intersectionally tailored to each context, is by understanding different voices from across the world. And so I wanted to bring Jonathan on because he's awesome.
So, Jonathan, how do you feel after this? Right, you're having the best life right now.
Yeah. I'm just going to record this, keep playing. This is like the next 5 episodes of the podcast. It's just Kay talking,
Definitely. So, Kay
I very much appreciate it. I very much appreciate it.
Kay already shared, the question that I wanted to share. So, is there a difference in amplifying DEI in the US and Europe? And I'm going to start with Jonathan.
I would say to some, yes, in some aspects. Obviously, there's different contexts. But if we're talking about things like race, one thing that's massively obvious is the conversation around race, in terms of a willingness to discuss it, the fluency around that is a lot greater in the US, massively. Like, people who aren't even that interested in race are at least use the word. Whereas if we're talking about the UK, for example, people tend not to talk about race. They tend to talk about ethnicity. And sometimes they conflate the two. Whereas in the US, it's very clear understanding of what race is, at least because, in my opinion, because of the institutional issues and the institutionalized nature of race and racism, which we've got in the UK, but it's a little bit more covert. Whereas in the US, there were laws that are really difficult to ignore that, mandated different treatment, different legislation in the way, the outcomes for people who are Black compared to others, even like Islamophobia as well. Like, there have been institutionalized laws against Muslims that have only just been changed in the past sort of like 60, 70 years. So it's incredible. So
it's almost similar here in the Netherlands. So in the Netherlands, due to the Black Lives Matter protesting, all of a sudden the government knows how to talk about institutional racism, right? They haven't said any sorry regarding, what happened in the past. And I'm meaning in the past, and not seeing that what happened in the past 400 years ago is already reflecting every Black person in the Netherlands. So we definitely have a lot to do. And also the word equity, we're not there yet. We are just, working on the diversity and inclusion part. And therefore, we are not ready yet to discuss the equity part. But I'll leave it up to Kay to discuss the US version.
No pressure, representing her home country, she
Yay.
says. So it's so interesting that Jonathan said that. Yeah, British people are so polite, Hasiba, exactly. I think that's such a great comment. So my experience is, and I think, so my background, for those of you who are unfamiliar with my work, is I'm a Filipino American who has called Spain home for the last 10 years. So I have the immigrant lens of somebody who is an immigrant herself, who is the daughter of immigrants, as my parents immigrated from the Philippines. And then the Philippines, which is the product of basically back-to-back colonialism. So you've got 333 years in a Spanish convent and 50 years in Hollywood, which is basically the most recent history of my parents' home country. And so I'm already quite intersectional in how I view the world, because I'm always naturally drawn to stories that aren't necessarily the ones that you see, or I'm always looking for, is that the whole story? Is there another lens to it? Is there another aspect to it? So to Jonathan's point about, even the US conversation specifically around race, which has taken a massive spotlight because of everything happening in my home country, there's, obviously everybody's talking about like 1619. That was like the key date when slavery happened. And this is a very uncomfortable conversation I had with my Spanish husband the other day. Actually, they copied and pasted the exact plantation model from Latin American colonies, which were owned by the Spanish 100 years before. So, we just kind of keep pulling at all of these different threads, right? But I think the one big difference in terms of DEI that I found between the Europe and the US is that while systemic bias exists, and we know that there's a reason why all of us are in this work, I would say in the US, I sense it can be addressed more openly than in Europe.
Yeah. In
the workplaces, especially because of, somebody commented just now, like, oh, British people are polite. I'm like, I would say that in general, in just my experience with Europeans, depending on Northern or Southern Europe, there's very much here is where what you're allowed to speak about at work, and here's what you're not allowed to speak about at work. And so conversations like this that actually move DEI forward are still quite censored, and nobody really knows what to do about it yet. So that's kind of my overarching conclusions, and I'm happy to hear both of your takes on this as the American observer.
Yeah. He's taking over this podcast. He's taking over this podcast. But from my perspective, so from the Dutch perspective, a lot of people are having a hard time to definitely talk about race, definitely talk about, the injustice that is happening. And from my side, I just showed Marjolein, who was a previous guest speaker. Together we are nudging HR directors. Together we are nudging HR platforms, because I do feel like HR needs to speak up regarding the dehumanizing factor in the workplace. So that's what we are doing now. And there needs to be so much more. There needs to be so much more than just, seeing the things only in the media.
Yeah,
Jonathan.
I like your point about HR as well, because what I find is one of the perceptions of HR is that they're there to protect the interests of the organization, of the business. So when you're talking about nudging HR, that can be a challenge, because some of the processes, some of the issues, some of the policies, if we're trying to address that, we're going to be pointing to some extent towards HR, who are the agents of the organization. So that can lead to tension. So, well, here's an interesting thing. And this is something that I've heard of, and something I think that works really well, but it's a challenge. What if diverse DEI, as we're calling it here, what if that person...
What happened?
A completely different perspective. It has a completely different set of outcomes, because, well, essentially you're not pointing back to the individuals who you're having to report to. So that can be something interesting. I haven't seen that much in the US, though. I'd be interested to hear what that looks like.
Have you seen that in the UK then? Where have you seen this? Because this is the first time.
Yeah.
This is the first time that I'm hearing it.
It does happen. But it often tends to be task forces, in my experience, as opposed to a permanent role. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think.
I think that we need task forces. We need task forces inside the company, outside of the company. I also want organizations to show their numbers. I want them to show their numbers. When it comes to supporting these initiatives, I want to see how many people of color are working there, and where are they at? Are they only on the bottom layer, or are they also on the top? In the top, I want to see numbers. It's okay.
Okay.
I'm going to follow up after Kay. Yeah.
Okay, so my thinking with this is, and to your point, I don't think it has to be an either or conversation. I think you're right that HR tends to be gatekeepers, or tends to be kind of in charge of the conversation. It is. Hi. I think was it my connection? I think it was probably my connection. Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
So the beauty of live, folks. So I was going to say that I think that we've found, at least in the US, we've made some efforts around creating internal initiatives for diversity, as in it's not just necessarily housed within HR, although it starts that way. So we have CDOs, we have chief diversity officers of companies. However, to Vivian's point of, we are looking at representation in terms of numbers, but then when you look at the C-suite, that now everybody's kind of taking those larger companies to task, the only person in the C-suite who is of color or of any sort of minority or historically excluded group is the chief diversity officer. And that's when we need to have a larger conversation around, well, how do we make diversity, equity, and inclusion in the company more of a global initiative in the company, rather than it being housed under one person or a figurehead or just a symbol, essentially, of, hey, tick the box. Yes, exactly.
Yes, the window dressing. So a lot of people are commenting right now, and I definitely agree with Marjolein and what Hasiba was sharing. Like, it's HR and internal communication, but it also needs to come from the leadership, right? Because I see so many mission statements sharing, we stand for diversity, we applaud equality, we applaud inclusion. Well, bring them to light, right? Bring them to light. So a lot of people are reacting right now. I'm having a hard time to go to the question. So I am definitely highlighting Bernie. Yes, we don't have racism. A lot of white people publicly shared like they don't see racism. And I was thinking, like, if you walk one day in my shoes, you see the workload that I have regarding racism. You see what I want to what I want to prevent my son from enduring. And Jonathan, and also Kay, can you share something about that?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear your experiences, Jonathan. For me, I would say my lived experience is, if we're playing a game of oppression Olympics, I'm probably not the winner. But I will say that. But I will say that my entry point into this work came from my first ever discrimination as somebody who is what folks would call white passing in the US. I am on the fair skin side, and I have a face that is quite confusing for folks. So I get the "where are you really from" very often. But coming to Spain and coming to a country which up until recently didn't have that much immigration, and being automatically labeled Chinese and all the ramifications of that, the first time I've ever experienced discrimination outright on the street was in Spain, was in Europe. Yeah. And so if I'm coming into the conversation from the last 10 years and what I've experienced, I mean, imagine what it looks like for folks who, the further you are down that oppression Olympics ladder, what they have to deal with every day. And I think that my hope is that by listening to this conversation and seeing, someone from the Netherlands, someone from the UK, and someone from the US who is a woman of color now based abroad, is that we're realizing it's not, the racism conversation is not something that we can only isolate and say, oh, that's an American problem. Those riots that we're seeing are very much, an isolated thing. And so we don't have to talk about that here. If anything, we need to double down on it, because we're seeing how globally it's affecting all of us, and what that now means for organizations to actually create spaces to hold it, rather than kind of sticking their ears in and doing the, I can't stick my ears in because I have headphones, but you understand.
It's a people problem. It's definitely a people problem. Yeah. And Jonathan?
To be honest, I tend not to talk that much about the racism, discrimination, prejudice that I've experienced.
Are you over it?
No, you'll take up the whole show.
Yeah,
there would be nothing left. And also, because you have to remember, I get contacted every single week by people sharing these stories as well. So I try and take that and use that. But what I will say is, look, there's a reason I introduce myself as Dr. Jonathan all of the time. So you introduce me as Jonathan here. Normally, in any public space, I will introduce myself as Dr. Jonathan. And there's a reason for that.
I understand that now. Absolutely.
Yeah. And someone, do you know how many people have said to me in the past month that they understand why I do that?
Yeah.
I walk into buildings and everything. Yeah. And even in the DEI space, the way I'm treated, completely different, completely different before and after I introduce myself. When you say that word doctor, it transforms the perception. And also, not many people are used to seeing a black man in any position of authority. And for the most part, if I'm getting on a stage, I'm standing here. I've got privilege here in this space as an authority, as you've positioned me. But that's for
when you go outside,
that's for a reason. Outside of seeing people in, like, you know, sports stars, musicians. So I use that deliberately, and a lot of people have said to me, "Oh, we get it now."
Yeah, I understand it. Yeah, it's weird that we have to label ourselves to be seen like that. It's weird. It's weird because if you was a white person, nobody would have judged you. Nobody would have doubted you. Nobody would have had these questions that they want to ask you. Where did you study? Where did you go? I need to do that research about it. Is he really a doctor? Nobody would have done that. So
I think the biggest difference in the conversation for folks who are listening who don't necessarily have the lived experience is when we're talking about the workplace. My experience is that people of color or people from underrepresented groups are hired based on accomplishments, and the majorities or non-minorities are hired based on potential.
Yeah.
And just that alone should tell you everything that you need to know about why we have to raise the floor for different groups and why our this conversation needs to happen.
I don't know if I can do this all the time because you guys are sharing so many awesome, juicy stuff. So I'm going to go to the next question because I saw this, I think, on your Twitter, and I was just like, this is the ultimate question. So can you share why DEI is not a crisis management tactic or not the checkbox thing that we often see others do? Okay.
Actually, I want to hear from Dr. Jonathan. I know. This is the battle.
Yeah.
Well, I would probably talk about what it is as opposed to what it isn't. So you're right. I imagine the three of us here get calls from organizations as a reaction. Something bad has happened.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? We didn't know. All this type of stuff. So I would say if you're in a reactionary phase, that tells us what you think about diversity and inclusion in the first place. And a lot of it is whether it's PR or reputation management, risk management. I think it's more useful to think of inclusion. As I said at the beginning, it's about how you can get everyone to reach their potential. Individuals reach their potential. The organization reaches its potential. And so it's about moving forward in the 21st century, creating a workplace that belongs in the 21st century. Some of the practices and the issues we're talking about, they don't belong here anymore. And not everyone's going to make it with us into the future. This pandemic has revealed a lot of the truth. Organizations, some of them who aren't fit for purpose, aren't coming with us into the future. We need to leave some of these practices in the past as well. So it's definitely not a crisis management. I think it's the way to have organizations moving forward in a global economy when we're trying to get everyone to perform.
It feels like I'm sitting in church. No, really. It feels like I'm sitting in church where you are preaching. It's just like, this is my ultimate diversity panel. I have so many more, but this is, to me, it feels like you're singing. You know, it's like the best Beyonce song both of you are acting, and it's amazing. It's amazing. So can you share your version?
Yeah, I love what Jonathan just said. I think it's so important when I'm just even thinking of the pandemic. I know Jonathan and I have had offline online, you know what I mean? Offline conversations about this. It's all virtual. It's all online, y'all. Talking about how it feels like whiplash in just the pandemic, right? We've seen DEI, or diversity and inclusion initiatives, or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, rather, go from a nice to have to all of a sudden organizations are rushing. Like, I don't know about you, Jonathan, but the last few weeks, I know, because you and I haven't talked in a bit, because it's just been crazy and nuts, because it went from, we don't need this anymore, or this is discretionary budget for us as an organization, which shows you, like Jonathan was saying, where your priorities are, but at the same time, like, have to deal with this pivot, have to deal with your own personal feelings as a consultant around, this was just as important then as it is now.
Yeah.
It's even, I'm glad that you're on board and you're on the train, but now I want to make sure that this isn't a flash in the pan thing for you. And so it's, how do we continue, and this is the open question I think for all of us, is how do we continue to show organizations, one, that this is a reckoning moment, that is not just a moment, it's a movement. And how do we move every single person forward and move our organizations forward into the future? And so one of the things that my team and I did was we put together an executive roundtable at the end of April, talking with different big tech firms to understand how they were taking care of their people during the pandemic as they moved to remote working. And the big thing that came up across the board was, we want to make sure that our people are okay. We want to understand that how this pandemic is affecting our different groups of people in different ways, and how do we customize and tailor our support to help each of them, and how do we make sure that all of these different initiatives that we're considering in our company to make sure that all of our people still know that they're valued and seen and heard continue even after the pandemic ends, whenever that happens, and move our organizations into the future, not just for our current talent, but also our future talent, because as we know, your son is a perfect example of this, Vivian. That's what the future looks like. It's not identity boxes, it's multi-hyphenates.
Yeah.
So we have to prepare our organizations for that.
Definitely. And I do have to say that the organizations who see the power in DEI and see that they need to do their work, or even admit that they don't know where to start, but at least they are calling in some forces to help, those are the organizations that will stay longer. Those are the organizations that you'll see the employer branding will fly. Those are the organizations that will be highlighted. Those were the organizations where you don't see, that comment, that thing that I shared about Adidas, that won't be your organization. So I'm happy that, you are fellow advocates when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because we need to amplify it. And we need to, just like I said before, this, for me, it's not a one-night stand thing. We need to build that muscle. We need to, it needs to become part of the DNA of the company. That's how I feel about diversity and inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jonathan.
I've always got so much to say.
Share. We have the time.
That's why we're here.
Regarding of the time, do you mind going over for maybe 15 minutes, if that is okay?
Yeah, I'm always happy to spread the word. One thing that I think is interesting, which is a point that you've both raised, is, look, how are you distinguishing between organizations who just want to be seen to be doing something now versus the ones who are trying to do something ongoing? Because a lot of the work that we're talking about is not flashy, it's not panel events, it's not getting key speakers, it's stuff that's repetitive, small errors, it's iterative, and no one's going to be looking. And that's the work that needs to be done, but it often doesn't attract attention, it doesn't create celebrities. And so I favor that anyway with clients, with organizations I work with. And now I just ask them, I'm assuming this is part of an ongoing program. And when they say it's not, then it's easy. You just don't work with them, because those organizations aren't going to be going forward. You got a load of consumer brands as well. So the example that you brought up, if you're a consumer facing organization and you're not taking this seriously, you've got some huge issues, because 4 weeks ago, people were using words like boycott, and people actually talk.
I do have to, sorry to stop you, but here in the Netherlands, we have a boycott. Everybody's investing their money for just one day, and maybe they will continue to do that. Everybody's investing their money in a people of color organization or brand, because we want to see how we can uplift and use that money into our own environment, right? So just so you know, 7/7 will be an investment day of people of color investing in their own community. Yes.
Okay, yeah, interesting, right?
Yeah.
And then, there's another point. It's like maybe they could do it on other days as well, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But the issue about, if you're a consumer-facing brand, what can you afford to not take this seriously? And the answer is no, you can't. At a time when the economy is, I don't know, we keep using the word unprecedented all the time, right? But it's unprecedented issues. now we've got now we're looking at organizations internally, this issue of systemic racism, systemic inequality. If you're not willing to address that, people are just willing to vote and they're moving elsewhere. So I think it's a massive challenge for organizations. They need to make this part of a long-term system of change. You don't have to, but the market's going to respond. And we're already seeing that as well.
Okay, Bernie is mentioning something which I am curious about. What about is there a list of organizations that are really doing a good thing when it comes to DEI? And can we just shout them out? Because I think that we need to amplify it, and we need to nurture, because sometimes organizations are sensitive when they see a competitor, when they see another organization getting awards, getting something that they are doing good, and also know that it works with hiring, getting new talent, right? So is there a list? I don't see a list in here in the Netherlands. The only list that I look to is Great Places to Work. That's my only reference here in the Netherlands. Do you have other lists regarding this?
I think, okay, sorry, please, I'll jump in afterwards.
No, it's fine. It's so interesting, because if you'd asked me this a few weeks ago, maybe I would have had a different answer. Because I think that, Jonathan has brought up a really good point, which I truly appreciate, which is most of the work that we're doing is behind the scenes. And I think that my issue with highlighting organizations specifically doing this work is that you're unfairly putting them on a pedestal if they get it wrong, which they will, because if you're doing it right, if you're doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work right, you're going to get it wrong more times than you will get it right. Yeah. And so, for example, I'm thinking just, a few months ago about Google. They disbanded I think it was an internal program called Sojourn, which they realized that they were talking about the Black experience in the company, but it was the Black experience for the US. And for a global company, that wasn't going to fly. So the reason that they disbanded it was because they're looking for other alternatives. They're working with another consultant to create something that is more indicative of the Black experience and global. And then in the press, in a Forbes piece, I believe it was, this is how I found out about it, and I think, to her credit, the chief diversity officer did an amazing job answering it. She talked about the reason why they got rid of it, but the headline for it was one of these salacious sort of things around, we got it wrong. They got rid of this program, which means that Google is catering towards, and turn it into some sort of political thing for clickbait. And I thought, well, good on the CDO for doing an amazing job answering that. But, that's actually holding us back as not just consultants and practitioners, but those who are actually intentionally doing the work every day. Because if you're doing the work right, you're actually going to find places where the language has evolved, where the benchmarks have moved, where inclusion, or what you understood about the strategy to create inclusion today, was not the right thing that should have, that'll work, in the months to come. So the only reason I'm hesitant to say companies is because, I know Intel off the top of my head is doing an amazing job. I know there's so many big tech firms that get all the play, and I work with a lot of tech firms, but Intel actually set a benchmark and has done a really good job with gender diversity across the board, and is continuing to build on that. But that's the only one that comes to mind that I know of from the news. But even then, from my perspective as a consumer of the news who doesn't work with that company directly, I have to wonder what's the story behind that headline.
I too. I am seeing so many window dressing messages that I had to call out on a lot of people, and I'm still doing that here in the Netherlands. So I definitely agree with what Bernie is saying, that at least, we can discuss about the companies that are doing the right thing and learning from it. I also wanted to share something about, I don't know why. I forgot about it, so I'm going to pass the mic to Jonathan, and maybe in the meantime think about what I wanted to share. So, Jonathan.
Well, one of the things that you brought up is this idea of awards, right?
Yeah.
I think people think that if you win an award or you've got a badge, that means that you're actually doing the work properly and effectively. That's not to say that you're not, but what is the award for? Or what does it represent? Sometimes, we've got to draw the distinction between celebration and effectiveness. Because if there was an award for an organization that had maybe increased a particular measure of diversity over a period of time, that's like something we could all say they're doing really well. But I tend not to see those types of awards. It tends to be a lot of, but recognition is important and it shouldn't be dismissed. But what we find is one of the 7 most common mistakes is that organizations put reputation ahead of actually doing the work. So if you focus on the work, everything that Kay was saying, that won't always attract attention. It will help you in the long term. But if you're saying, okay, we're going to get an award, we're going to sponsor and get a table at an awards ceremony. We're going to sponsor an event. So we will align ourselves with diversity and inclusion without actually being under scrutiny for performing in that way. And so I would encourage everyone, when we're trying to see what good looks like, ask yourself what standard that you're holding that to, and then compare other organizations. You'll often find that they're not doing it.
I just saw, when you look at Financial Times on their website, when you look at the About Us, and then you scroll through the diversity, there's something that I saw for the first time, and that is a report about their gender, but also about ethnicity and about how they, the percentages or how they pay. This should be, to me, should be the standard for every company, showing diversity, showing the money, showing the percentages, so we can hold them accountable regarding making an effort that they are improving diversity and inclusion, and also share stories about how it is. I don't hear a lot of stories about diversity and inclusion, and I don't want to see only the D&I officer who talks highly about the corporate. I want to see the people themselves sharing those stories so that we can align with ourselves. When I started, and I'm turning 40 in August, when I started my career and up till now, I have been, most of the times, I'm the only one. I'm the only Black woman. And some of the times I'm the only Black person within the company, of a company of maybe 100 people. Come on.
Yeah. It happens, right? And a lot of the people...
Too often.
A lot of the people who are going back to the winning awards and stuff, they tend to be the only Black person that they meet as well. But you know what? It's worth us recognizing our own bias here in this conversation. So we're talking about data. We're talking about Europe versus US. We have to remember that in countries like France, collecting ethnicity data is not a simple, easy thing to do in the way that we're implying or have implied, or that
here in the Netherlands, it's not allowed.
Collect the data.
In the Netherlands, it's not allowed. It used to, but it's not allowed anymore. And what we are doing now is we are nudging companies to share diversity percentages. I don't know what the questions are, but at least they are nudging the companies to share more of the diversity perspective so that we can highlight that.
Yeah, because I think that's a crucial point, because what does good look like when you can't share the data in the way that everybody is saying?
True.
That's the challenge.
True.
And that moves the conversation away from diversity to inclusion.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's been a massive frustration for me in some cases of trying to get some of this data in the UK and in other parts of Europe as well. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And that's the whole goal, right? Diversity is not the end goal ever in this work. It's so that all of us who've been onlys in rooms and the facts, the lived experiences of anybody who is from a historically excluded group across the spectrum no longer has to feel that way. That to me is inclusion. That's when Jonathan and I don't need a job.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll happen, but
it will take a while. It will take a long while. I think it will take a long while. But also what Bernie is asking is very interesting. The companies there are saying that they are agile, which implies that they have transparency of their principle. And I don't see anything about DEI. And when it comes to agile, or whatever term it is, when it comes to employee experience, there seems to be an exclusion when it comes to diversity and inclusion. With whatever the label or the flavor is, there seems to be that it's not for everybody.
Yeah. you have to remember that we're talking about systems that genuinely look invisible to some people. So
Yes. Yeah.
if you speak to people, and we do interviews, I do a lot of interviews, people genuinely think that their organization's a meritocracy. And so all the inequality that we might refer to, they think that it's just by chance, or as Kay was saying, it is inclusive, but there's another explanation for why that hasn't happened. So people genuinely think that. So the way I describe it is, look, we are telling people that the world isn't flat. Yeah, we're saying that the world is a globe, but guess what? When I look outside, when I go in here, the world looks flat. It really does, doesn't it? It looks flat. But if you know how to look, if you know how to observe and perceive the world, you can understand that we are in a globe. So part of what we're doing is letting people know, guess what? There are other ways of looking at the world in order to understand that it's not flat.
Oh, you're kidding.
You just blew my mind, Jonathan.
I love that. So I have to touch on this question, and that is, should we or should we not talk about race at work? And why yes, why not? Okay.
She rolls up her sleeves.
Okay, this is where you are go to battle mode. Is that it?
No, I'm kidding. No, it's not that at all. It's so interesting for me because almost all of my DEI, and I will use this interchangeably. So for those of us who are based in Europe, I know the conversation here is very much diversity and inclusion, and I, as someone from a US background and as someone who does a lot of work with companies, I use DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, just to define that for folks who are just joining in on the conversation. However, I think equity is, to what Vivian said at the top of this conversation, is definitely still an amorphous term here. And the reason why is because we haven't had the race conversation. And the fact of the matter is, as somebody who is the literal byproduct of colonialism, we haven't talked about the fact that most of the systems that we're seeing around race or around how we built hierarchies and companies and organizations have all stemmed from the fact that the countries that had guns and ships first took their belief systems with them. And we're still seeing the generational ramifications of that. So whenever I would walk into my European clients' offices or would liaise with them for the first time, they would always contact me about gender, which I know is obviously, Vivian and I can talk about this for hours, it's very important, but it's the most visible and quote unquote easy diversity to talk about because it doesn't have to dive into the discomfort of a system that is as prevailing and as ingrained in our DNA as race is, or ethnicity, as it were, in a European context. So it's really refreshing now to see my EU-based clients all of a sudden want to open that conversation, whereas before, I walk into a room and I am my whole self. So I will want to talk about race, but for many folks who it's their first time liaising in the conversation or entering diversity and inclusion or trying to create something in the company, it's like, let's deal with gender first and then we'll talk about race. Whereas now we're finally having that conversation. So I think that yes, we have to talk about it. We have to be mindful, and this is where I'm actually turning to both of you as people who were born and raised in the EU, in Europe, about whether that's called race, whether that's called ethnicity, whether that's a colorism conversation. I don't know. And that's that's what now companies that are based here, in my experience, have to have and reckon with for us to fully be able to understand and dismantle why certain people aren't included, why certain diverse groups that we're trying to gain representation for are starting with less in life or with more obstacles or more, headwinds rather than tailwinds. And so that's what we have to talk about. And race is a critical part of that conversation.
Jonathan.
Well, for me, it's a loaded question, right? In that I'm Black, my PhD was about race. Yeah. And I talk about it a lot anyway. So I 100% think that it's important to talk about it, particularly because so many people do not. It's invisible to a lot of people, which is why a lot of people don't talk about it. Kay's point about gender is crucial.
Yeah.
Because organizations looked at diversity to mean gender, but if you looked at the people who were benefiting from those initiatives, it wasn't all women. It tended to be white middle class women. So there is a racialized element in there, because if we're getting the gender piece done, just as you said, Kay, then we'd expect all women to benefit, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that that wasn't happening, it draws attention. If, once again, if you're willing to look, that only some people benefit. So it's important to talk about race, but once again, the way we describe it is it's taken centuries to perfect. People think it's invisible. It's a system. It's almost, it's like breathing the air. It's like a fish in water. You don't know it's there. So it is absolutely crucial to speak about it. Getting back to the idea of race, ethnicity, I think because those are different things, which particularly in the UK are conflated. So for people in the UK will know this term, BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. Yeah. Now, if you hearing that, it's normally it's a euphemism for people who are non-white, right? But black is referring to a racial group. Asian is referring to geography, or at least to some extent ethnicity, and a minority ethnic is referring to ethnic groups. So it's conflating a lot of different things. So a useful thing is to just recognize what is race, what is ethnicity, recognize where they're conflated, and then at least we're talking about it, which means then we can start to address the issues of colorism as well, like Kay said as well, just to understand that. At least talking about it in the first instance.
You touched on so many layers, and I want to bring it back to school, because the organizations are doing their best, and at least the organizations that I'm hearing about and talking about. But I also want to do something, because when you look at our history books, when you look at the lessons that the children are learning, a lot of the Black history it isn't in the history books, which made the UK great, which made Spain great, which made the States great, which made a lot of the companies, a lot of the countries that are now profiting from what happened 400 years ago, slavery. They don't want to talk about it. And then they address that it was so long ago, but yet I'm not disrespecting anybody. I don't want to disrespect those who lost their family, or those who lost people during World War II. But for us, that past, for us, it's worse than World War II. It's worse than World War I, because we are still being affected by something that happened 400 years ago. And that's why I feel we need to bring our history, the Black history, the people of color history, back to the school books, because it starts from a young age. Once I learned about the Ghanaian history, the relationship that Ghana had with the Netherlands, I learned when I was 15, and was just like, okay, we are talking about the golden history, the golden this, and I learned that at a young age, but nobody never told me about the slave history, the slave trading, and what happened in Ghana, and what the Dutch, the inbring of the Dutch had. And now that I'm older, I'm also realizing that what happened in the past, and the way we were seen in the past, and the way we were judged in the past, it's been passed on generation for generation for generation. And I do feel like once people are opening up regarding inclusion, regarding diversity, they can also bring that back to home. But I do feel that the schools need to be included. So one of the major things that happened here in the Netherlands during this lockdown, and also during this Black Lives Matter movement, they made a commitment to add, some of the history pages back, and to share some of the Black history that has to be included in the history pages. Yeah.
That's but it's so powerful.
Yeah. But also, you say Black history, but you're actually just talking about history.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thank you.
About history.
Thank you. Yeah.
And also, because the other thing you said as well. So hey, maybe this is the battle bit, right?
Okay, come on, gloves on.
When you said because you made a reference to something that happened 400 years ago,
Yeah.
I would draw attention to what is happening now, as in this is something that is happening now. Started then, but this is a system that, as you said, produces and reproduces itself. So we're not just talking about a historical event, we're talking about ongoing systems, ongoing processes, ongoing policies that for the most part appear invisible. So when you can't find things in history books or the curriculum at school, that's not an accident. It's designed to be that way.
Yeah. I'm forgetting the name of the lady. She's so important, and I'm forgetting her name. The American lady who made colorism, not colorism, but the difference why white people don't want to be a black person. Her name. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I'm not a historian, so okay.
She's a very famous American lady. She's still alive, and she talks about
Jane Elliott.
Yeah. Julie,
yeah,
right?
I found it eventually.
Yeah.
Okay, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
What she has done and the way she has amplified diversity, but also made it visible that a white person knows in their heart, in their mind, they know the disadvantages that we suffer, that we see. Because the fact that she's asking the question, would you be a black person for just one day? Nobody's standing up. Nobody is saying that let me be a black person for one day, because they know, they feel it, they sense it, that there is a disadvantage. They might not know everything, but they know that there is a disadvantage.
Absolutely. And she's prolific. And I think to your point, and kind of piggybacking off of that. Oh, see, she found it too. Jane Elliott. Yay. So I think when we're talking about actually creating inclusion in companies, if we were trying to thread a thread through all of these different beads and all these different thoughts for folks, we really have to understand that this goes so much deeper than a black square on Instagram. This goes so much deeper than, understanding like it's a UK thing, it's a Netherlands thing, it's a Spain thing, it's a US.
It's a people thing.
It's a people thing. It's a human thing. And to Jonathan's point, it's so ingrained into how everything has been built, and it's been done so strategically and so mindfully to perpetuate systems of power, that how can we possibly in one solution or in one lifetime or in one company hold them up as the standard and the model for, look, they fixed the diversity problem. Look, they're inclusive. They've made it work, because we still have our own generational messages to deal with. We have the fact that there are studies that talk about, if you historically don't see yourself represented in media and in books and in history books, as it were, in the Netherlands or anywhere, the fact that all of us have to find out our history later on in life shows you the luxury. Like, I remember when I have my bugbear with DNA tests, so I'm going to go off on a rant here. I swear there's a point. If you have the luxury of wanting to know your heritage because it goes so far back, that's a completely different conversation for somebody who is the direct product of slavery or colonialism. And so if we're trying to have conversations about creating inclusion in companies and creating inclusion in countries and what that looks like to dismantle it, we really have to understand that it is long-term work. It's going to require an intersectional strategy. It's going to require different folks from different sides of what we consider the identity box spectrum all contributing. I mean, I just think about, I shared this the other day for Juneteenth. I didn't know about Juneteenth until I went 7 or 8. But this is way back when we had to go to the libraries for encyclopedias. Because one of my older white music teachers, and she was old enough to remember Jim Crow. Let's just say that. She was quite old. But she taught us lift every voice and sing. And she said, go to, I encourage you to go and look it up because there's a huge history around this. And she knew we were like, 10, 11-year-olds. We're little shits. So we didn't really care about this stuff. But I was a nerd. So I went to the encyclopedia and I found it afterwards. And that's when I learned about what that day meant. And that's when I learned about this song and its connection to the movement. And if I was able to learn about that as a second-generation Filipino American from a white woman in Southern California, these are how stories shift. That's the power of creating inclusion in companies and in countries and in every space where we should be having diverse voices contributing to the conversation, because that's the goal, is that it doesn't become a Black history conversation or an Asian history conversation. It's what makes us human, and how do we recognize all the different ways that the systems that we have benefited from or been oppressed by for so long, that we can actually come to the table together and dismantle it for a solution that really makes us all human and that brings out the best in us.
Okay.
We're going off the topic a bit, but I swear.
No, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. And I
love that.
I don't know what to say, because I'm taking all the words in that you're both sharing, and it feels to me like this conversation is needed. Was needed, is needed, and I'm happy that you're sharing it now, because you're helping so many people with this, understanding this, teaching me even to look beyond. No, really, to look beyond. I'm even almost getting emotional out of it, because it's causing others goosebumps. Hasiba is sharing she's getting goosebumps, but even I am having goosebumps, and even I am affected by this in a positive way. So thank you. Thank you both for doing this. I also wanted to share something. Bernie shared a very long message, so I'm going to read it out loud. She's sharing, I like Abraham X. Kennedy's quotes from How to Be Anti-Racist. What's the problem with being not racist? It's a claim that signifies neutrality. I am not racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. There is no neutrality in the racism struggle. The opposite of racist isn't not racist, it's anti-racist. What's the difference? So let's look beyond that, because the word racist here in the Netherlands, it's a very loaded statement. So most of the time when I refer to that, I talk about dehumanizing, because I want to have a conversation with them. When I start using the word racist or not being racist, they are going to go in their, let's say, little kitty mode, where they are not going to listen to me anymore because I called them racist, and I'm leading them away from the thing that I want to discuss. What about you? What do you think?
Jonathan, I know you're discussing this book in your book club, so I'm excited to hear.
Actually, I think we're discussing how to be an anti-racist in our next book club. I do refer to it directly. What I don't do is call people racists.
Yeah.
Because it's often people refer to racists. They're talking about racists, but actually they're talking about discrimination and acts of discrimination, individual acts of discrimination perpetrated is the word I'm looking for, by individuals.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's useful to think of racism as the system, and you've heard me say this several times, a system of advantage or disadvantage. When you think about it that way, it's got more predictive power. It explains what's going on. So when I refer to racism, I tend to refer to the systems, the structures, as opposed to individuals themselves.
Yeah.
And that is more helpful. Because if I go back to the UK, or anyway, being called I would say this, historically, being called a racist, that was one of the worst things that anyone could call you, right? In the past 20 years. But the meaning of that means less, because it's been thrown around in so many different ways. And it is a disputed term as well. So not everybody's clear about what they mean. But when I'm talking about racism, I am very clear. I use the word.
Do we need to nudge people to become anti-racist?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I like that book, because whether you agree with it or not, it's quite binary. This is why, so there's plenty of room to argue about that book, but you are forced to make a decision or a conversation, have a conversation. Yeah. And so one of the things that I said is that I think people are going to reinvent this term anti-racist to differ from what the author Vivian Acquah said. So we'll see.
Okay.
I think there's so much I'm listening to. I'm learning too, y'all. Like, this is great. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I think, to Jonathan's point, I love that anti-racism is now a term.
Yeah.
I'm so glad it's in our collective vernacular, because I never in a million years thought I would say the words white supremacy in a corporate setting for corporate workshops as much as I have, as I have in the last 3 to 4 weeks since everything happened in the US and our global anti-racism movement took off. I think, to Jonathan's point as well, there is, what it encourages you to do is to choose a side. And I think that on the side of tackling systemic racism, which is what we're dealing with, and I love that Jonathan made that distinction, you have to be active. Yeah. And anti-racist requires you to do rather than a static being. Yeah. Of, are you racist or are you not racist? Yeah. And you have to continually measure and prove that in your actions, in your words, in your thinking, in maybe not your initial reaction, because everyone has bias, and that's a conversation for another day. But maybe deciding to, what your second action or your second, thought is. That's being anti-racist. And I think that's a really interesting conversation that I'm grateful for within diversity, equity, inclusion companies. And I think that, to Vivian's question about how do we talk about racism, I don't think that calling people out is sustainable. I think that calling people up to be something like anti-racist or to be somebody who is going to actually actively work to dismantle this system is much more powerful, because it gives that person the agency rather than them in the static box of like, well, you're racist. And I think that's where a lot of conversations have unfortunately stalled. So I'm just grateful that it's a term now, because it makes my conversation so much more fun.
Okay, going up to the last question. I know that I think within 5 years we'll be still talking about, definitely we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, but what is your wish? So what is your wish for 2025 when it comes to humanizing the workplace and DEI? Jonathan?
5 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do.
Well, to be honest, every year, at the end of every year, I make predictions for for the following year. Actually,
did you predict this?
No, I did predict. I was about to say, no, definitely didn't predict this. And even
not a pandemic, come on.
At the beginning of the year, I was like, no, I couldn't have predicted that. But I think, what do I want in 5 years? Is for us to have made, for inclusion, well, actually, some of the things I said. So let's say D&I leaders reporting into HR, reporting into the senior leadership team. Senior leaders being tasked with having, let's say, DE&I measures, outcomes as part of their performance-related.
I saw that with Wells. I saw that with Wells Banking or something. I saw that with them, that they are doing that. Sorry to interrupt. I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that was a standard thing, that would change. That would change a lot of behavior. Yeah. So a couple of things, that would be a big deal anyway. There's a million other things, but a couple of things like that would be useful. Would be very useful.
So you're saying show us the numbers.
No. I'm saying incentivize behavior. I don't want to say show us the numbers, because as we said, if it's about inclusion, then maybe the numbers won't even matter as much. What I'm saying is, let's incentivize people's behavior so that they're motivated to act in an inclusive way.
Yeah. Okay, I get you. Yeah. Okay.
I would love to see mental health as a more critical part of the conversation. I think that, especially given we do not know the ramifications of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We do not know the ramifications of what we're going to look like on the other side. I think that mental health as an inclusive entry point into the conversation for DEI could be really interesting, because it's something that we know that it disproportionately affects underrepresented groups, especially people of color, especially when you look on every other news headline and people who could be your brother or sister are being victimized every day. We know that this pandemic is disproportionately affecting women who are having to deal with more caregiving duties, and what that's going to mean for what their roles are going to look like in the future.
Right.
So in 2025, I think what I'd really love to see companies do, if we're really talking about bringing full selves to work or creating spaces where people can thrive as their best selves, we need to be talking about how do we let people stop feeling like I have to check part of who I am in at the door, or I have to hide what it is that I'm struggling with, or I have to, differentiate personal and professional, because work and home have been blurred forever. Whether or not a company is willing to actually ingrain that into their organization, the lessons that they've learned about what happens when they let people show up as their full selves, even if it was a really awful experiment in remote working at scale, in the way that the pandemic forced our hand. I think that we have a lot to learn in terms of, giving people the opportunity to know that they're supported and seen even in their harder times, instead of feeling like they have to hide or cover who they are. That's what I'd really love to see.
I love it. And I also love that you shared something about mental health, because what people don't realize is, first of all, people of color are dealing with this whole pandemic. And on top of that, there is Black Lives Matter movement going on. So see that as a second pandemic on top of everything. I do have to admit, in the first few weeks, I was affected. I was really affected, and I didn't know how to cope. I found my own coping mechanism surrounding it. Also, being open about it towards my son caused me to open up some of the scars that I healed from years ago. And I want you to see us. I want you to see people of color. I want you to recognize us. And the only thing that I am asking is to listen and learn. Listen and learn. No judgments, no biases. Listen and learn. Listen how you can do better, and learn how you can do better, because now you know better, especially after watching this session. And I also want to ask everybody who's watching, everybody who's listening, share this episode with other people. Share this with those in power. Share this with your manager. Share this with HR, because they need to hear this. They need to see this episode so that they can know better. And like Maya Angelou says, you can do better. So thank you for watching. And I would like to say, Jonathan and Kay, please stay on. But I am grateful for teaching us, inspiring others. I'm so grateful for this conversation. And we need to do a follow-up. Maybe next quarter, do a follow-up. Because there's so much that I saw the plugging that you wanted to do another episode and another episode, so I heard you, and we can definitely make that happen. But know that this battle, it was a battle against inequity, and you made it happen. The both of you made this magic happen. So thank you for that, and looking forward to the next episode.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for everyone for listening. Thank you, Kay, for bringing me to the party.
Of course. You're my favorite diversity dance partner.
The plus one.
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to close off with sharing the episode of tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm inviting Sonsoles, Alonso, and Amir Saborovic to have that conversation about breaking silos as an artist. Same time, same place. only a different day. And my name is Vivian Acquah. I am the workplace wellness advocate, and together we can humanize the workplace. So thank you for watching. And if you're listening, thank you for listening. And until the next time, bye.
Thank you.